Most people think TikTok's US deal was about avoiding a ban. That's the surface story. The real story is that TikTok was forced into one of the most expensive, restrictive, and precedent-setting corporate compromises in modern tech, and it permanently changed the economics of the company's most valuable market. And the reason this deal is bigger than it looks comes down to one brutal fact. American TikTok users are worth far more than everyone else. eMarketer reported that the US accounts for only 10% of TikTok's users, yet generates about 41% of TikTok's ad revenue worldwide. So when the US threatened a ban, TikTok was defending the most valuable slice of its entire business. Now let's zoom in on what the US market actually means in dollars. That number matters because it tells you what TikTok was really bargaining over. A revenue stream bigger than the GDP of some countries, sitting inside one jurisdiction. So when politicians say national security, TikTok hears something else. Revenue concentration. Because if 40% of your ad revenue is tied to one country, and that country says to change your structure or leave, you don't get to debate philosophy. You calculate the cost of compliance versus the cost of losing the entire market. That's what this deal is, a corporate survival calculation. And here's what most people missed. The deal was about restructuring. Reuters reported TikTok reached a deal to create a new US joint venture to avoid a ban, and that the venture would handle data, content, and algorithm controls in ways that reduce ByteDance influence. So the structure is the story. Because once a platform is reorganized like this, it changes the economics forever. Let's talk about the actual ownership. Reuters reported that the new joint venture is majority US owned, with American and other non-Chinese investors holding 80.1%, and ByteDance retains 19.9%. Reuters reported that Oracle, Silver Lake, and Abu Dhabi-based MGX each hold 15% stakes. That 19.9% is not a random number. It's the difference between being treated as foreign-controlled and being treated as a minority shareholder. That's what regulators wanted. A structure where ByteDance can't credibly be described as controlling the US operations. And TikTok accepted that because the US market was too valuable to risk. A restructuring like this has a cost, not a one-time PR cost, a permanent operating cost. The Information Technology and Innovation Foundation described TikTok estimating the effort would cost around $1.5 billion just to get it off the ground, and about half that much annually to operate. So instead of a normal tech playbook, scale globally, become one core system, spread costs around the planet, TikTok took on a second playbook. Run a special, expensive version of the company for one country. This is the exact opposite of how platforms protect margins. Now we get to the part where everybody pretends not to care about, but it's the part that decides who wins. And it's the algorithm. People talk about data because data sounds concrete, but data storage is only half of the leverage. The algorithm decides which videos get pushed, which creators grow, which topics trend, which narratives spread, and how long people stay. And time is the product. More time means more ads, and more ads means more revenue. And that's the engine. Reuters reported that the venture will retain, test, and update TikTok's recommendation algorithm using US user data. If you're enjoying the video, please consider subscribing and liking the video. It would help a lot. Anyways, back to the video. And that the algorithm will be secured in Oracle's US cloud. That one detail is massive, because a platform that makes billions off a black box recommendation system just agreed to put parts of that system inside infrastructure controlled by a US partner. TikTok didn't really have a choice, and this is why the timing matters. A US law had already put a clock on TikTok's head. Wikipedia's overview of the effort describes how the Protecting Americans from Foreign Adversary Controlled Applications Act set up a divert or ban structure, and that TikTok even went temporarily unavailable in the US around the 2025 deadline period. And Reuters described how the recent joint venture deal was part of resolving that multi-year standoff. So the deal didn't happen because TikTok suddenly felt cooperative. It happened because the company was staring at the most expensive possible outcome, losing the market that pays the most. Here's the second blunder layer: valuation. Axios reported the deal valued TikTok US at around $14 billion and described it as low, while also claiming TikTok earns an estimated $14 billion annually from US advertising. Even if you treat the $14 billion annually as a rough estimate rather than a perfect audited number, the point stands. TikTok's US operation appears to generate an enormous amount of revenue relative to the valuation being discussed. That tells you what forced sales look like. When a seller is pressured, buyers don't pay maximum potential. They pay what the seller will accept to survive. And that's just textbook. And it sets a precedent for future cases. Because once the market sees that geopolitics can compress valuation, every global platform carries a risk discount. Now here's where the bigger than it looks part becomes obvious. The deal is a template, not just for TikTok, but for every cross-border tech company that wants to operate inside major markets. Because what TikTok just proved is that regulators can demand structural concessions, not just policy promises. They can now demand new boards, new ownership caps, new data controls, new algorithm security. Reuters and other reporting describe the new ventures for governance and protections around algorithm and data. That means the era of build globally first, negotiate later is fading. You can still build fast in small markets, but if you want to access the biggest money markets, you plan for regulatory structure from day one. That's a cost. And costs change who win. The winners will be the companies that can afford compliance overhead and legal complexity, because smaller challengers can't carry that burden. So ironically, the crackdown meant to reduce tech power can reinforce incumbents. So what mistake did TikTok make? The mistake wasn't creating a great product. The mistake was letting one country become too economically important while its ownership structure stayed politically unacceptable. That combination is the trap. High dependence plus high suspicion. That's how you end up negotiating under pressure. Now, a smart viewer might ask, if TikTok paid this much, who actually benefited? Start with the obvious winners. Oracle. Oracle is not a social media company. Oracle sells cloud, enterprise infrastructure, and long-term contracts. When TikTok routes US data and algorithm security through Oracle Cloud, it ties one of the largest attention platforms in America to Oracle's infrastructure. A Yahoo Finance piece framed TikTok's relationship to Oracle's cloud strategy as meaningful. This is the part people miss. Cloud infrastructure deals are sticky. Once you build systems around a provider, switching is expensive. Oracle locked in a massive client under political pressure, and that's a very good place to be. Then look at investors in the new venture. They're buying exposure to TikTok's US cash flows with a structure that reduces Chinese control risk. That can justify a higher multiple over time if the regulatory uncertainty drops. This is why Fortune even floated the idea that ByteDance could still win despite the restructuring, because the deal can preserve value that would have been destroyed by a ban. Now look at the losers. TikTok loses autonomy, ByteDance loses controls. Creators and businesses may eventually lose reach stability if the platform system become more constrained or more politicized. And the US government inherits a new problem: responsibility. Once a government forces a platform to restructure in order to operate, it's partly responsible for what the platform becomes afterward. And you can already see hints of that. Reuters reported California's governor accusing TikTok of suppressing certain political content after the ownership changes, with TikTok blaming technical issues. Whether those accusations hold up or not, the bigger point is this: the platform is now tied more closely to domestic political battles. That's another cost: political exposure. So when you hear TikTok US deal, don't file it under politics, file it under business strategy. A company that built a massive US revenue base with a politically fragile structure had to buy certainty at a high price. It gave up ownership control, accepted major operating expenses, and opened the door to a world where every government will ask, if the US got this, why can't we? That's the quiet expansion of the template. And the biggest consequence is simple. TikTok's deal didn't just decide TikTok's future in America, it showed every government and every platform how digital empires get allowed to exist, not by being loved, but by being structured.